a natural progression.
How's it? I'm Tyler.
Hey, I'm Eric.
And this is ShantottoCast. It's a brand new podcast that we've been thinking about recording for a while now. We both have a bit of a history with trading card games in general, and both of us have been playing Final Fantasy since Opus 3. The first time we ever played was at E3 2017.
And we're here to talk about, we're going to make probably about 10 to 15 videos about why Shantotto is the worst board wipe in the game. Sin is the superior board wipe, and nobody can convince me otherwise.
She's so bad that we jokingly named our podcast after.
Yeah, it's 100% ironic. Anyway.
But for real, we just want to kind of do podcast episodes of just kind of anything related to the Final Fantasy trading card game. There's not a lot of other podcasts, but there's obviously larger podcasts like RVA and Chocobros. There's podcasts around, but we just kind of want to throw our hat into the arena, kind of see if we can do this, and hopefully you're going to be along for the ride while we just kind of go over a bunch of different Final Fantasy TCG related topics.
Yeah, so I guess we figured, aside from the first unboxing we did of the Opus 8 box, I figured the real good, solid ground to start with, give us a foundation would be, kind of an overview of the meta as it developed. The competitive scene has been very interesting for Final Fantasy, to say the least. I don't think there's ever been a competitive TCG that has developed quite like this one. Now, it's not to say that this is the best.
Yeah.
However, it has had a very interesting, unique development over the years. And I think it's something that, players coming into the game or players that have been in the game for a while might not be aware of and should be aware of.
Yeah. And mind you, right now, we just saw the release of Opus 8. So this video is in March of 2019. So we're going to have the meta from 2017 in Opus 1 and 2 all the way to the beginning of Opus 8, because that's basically everything that we have right now. And then hopefully we could turn this into a recurring series where every year, at the end of the year, or at the end of each Opus, we could kind of look back and say, hey, this is what this Opus did, this is how this Opus impacted the meta, these were the top decks, etc. But to do that, we have to first go through everything else. And right now, the history of the game, especially competitively, isn't logged very well, especially if you compare it to Magic the Gathering, where we know the top deck of every single release, of every single rotation. Final Fantasy is a little in the ether right now, so we wanted to just do one where we could just run through Opus 1 through 7, 2017 to 2019, and just talk about what was really good at the time, if it's still good, if the cards are still seeing play, if that color is even still seeing play. And as we were researching this, we saw that there is a lot of change, even though the game's only been around for 2 years.
Yeah. Another thing to keep in mind is that we're going exclusively off of FFTCG.com. There are very few articles and videos we could find to document all the established meta of this game. The first big tournament we could find that was published was in May of 2017, just before we got into the game.
Yeah.
And we're not sure if, there was any kind of competitive scene on a large scale before that. But this is what we could find, and so this is what I think this is the best we could go off of.
Yeah.
So,
and once again, if you could find anything, if you would like to tell us kind of your history of the meta, or even if you started playing before this, or even just a casual, or your locals, feel free to put it in the comments. We'd love to talk to you and love to find out a little bit about the local meta. And I think that's something that's also really interesting about this game, is local metas tend to differ a lot. And we're going to see that also on a national scale in here.
Yeah, we'll probably throw in a little bit of our own 2 cents regarding our local meta for Chicago and the greater Illinois Midwest area.
Yeah.
Because I do recall quite a bit of change over time with that.
We have seen a lot.
Yeah. So I guess without further ado, let's get started with the beginning of Opus 1 and 2 in early 2017.
Yeah, so a little side note, all of these tournaments that we are going to be talking about, the only criteria that we had is that it had to be more than 8 people. So it had to be at least semi-large. It just needed to have a actual scene.
Yeah, we sorted by quote-unquote major category. So, everything reported is theoretically a regional, Masters, Championship, etc., all the way up to Worlds. So that is something to keep in mind.
Yeah. And then, without further ado, let's jump into the first one, which was Masters Kyoto in May 5th, 2017. So, the first place deck, the deck that won it all, was a Golbez variant. And we're going to be seeing that a lot for Opus 1 and 2. Like, Golbez, at least early in the game, was a very powerful card. And there were just tons of really solid 2-drops that you could play with them. You could even kind of play a Lightning deck that was kind of out of color. And then, kind of branching off of that, Lightning was also really big in Opus 1, and especially at Masters Kyoto.
Something to note is that Golbez wasn't strongest sword variant for a while to come yet. All Sid combo was in basically every deck, regardless of whether it was a Golbez deck or not. It was just a good combo. People knew it right from the start, and it's only gotten better with time, but we'll get there when we get there.
Yeah, because, and you'll see this kind of throughout Opus 1 and 2, there's a lot of Lightning played. Lightning, obviously, is still played today. It's still very played today. Also, is still very played today. But early game, it was a lot of Lightning and a lot of Lightning Ice. And we're going to kind of see that change as we keep going through. And then the next one, which was literally the next day in Rome, was Masters Rome, I think it was. I forget the official name of it. It was the Rome Cup.
Yeah.
Took place the next day on May 6th. So the first place was a Tidus Unoriku Pain deck, kind of like a 10 tribal deck. Water Wind, which is still very strong today, but at the time didn't have a lot of representation. But outside of that first deck, there was tons of mono Lightning.
Yeah, it is the first publicly available instance of Strongest Sword, Golbez, and the Wonder Twins deck, both of which did pretty well, unsurprisingly, because they're good decks. Wonder Twins is another archetype that just got way better over time with multiple iterations of both Palom and Porom coming out in, I forget exactly which sets, but they became way bigger.
Yeah, but it is very important to note that this is when we did get arguably the two best Wonder Twins, which was the Opus 2 3-drop Palom and the Opus 2 3-drop Porom, which was just kind of a suppressive combo. And I'm a little surprised to see it this early on, only because it didn't have Phoenix, it didn't have a lot of things that could bring from grave or play them from outside of the hand, outside of their 1-drop counterpart parts.
Right.
But outside of that, once again, we saw a lot of mono Lightning, also combo in every deck. That's kind of going to be present for the next year, so.
Yeah, and then continuing forward, we have the UK Nationals on May 27th.
Yeah.
Ice Lightning was first place. Big surprise.
Yeah.
Ice Lightning was really starting to pick up right about here.
Yeah.
And Lightning was very powerful. Once again, present in every deck in some form or another, even if it was about 5 cards that got splashed in.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, the first place winner was running Mannequin's X-Death combo.
Yeah. Which is definitely something that it hasn't aged well.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten a lot more Mannequins, so the deck doesn't see a lot of play. There was actually a Card of the Day article posted about this on the official Final Fantasy website, where they did talk about the Mannequin's X-Death. But overall, it was, despite the inclusion of Mannequin's X-Death, it was still a very Ice Lightning deck. It was something that we've kind of seen already. There was a lot of Lightning cards that we've already seen, once again, all Sid combos, and several other cards. But, yeah. And then right after this is, or not too long after this, rather, is the release of Opus 3.
And this is about when we got into the game.
Yeah.
E3 of 2017, we were there, and that's where we discovered this game. We saw a big giant banner. Final Fantasy trading card game. We bolted over there, bought our first starter decks. We were excited.
Because I've heard about the game every here and there, but I hadn't been able to follow up with any of it. But when we saw it, we both picked up a 13 starter deck. They were basically sold out of everything else. But we picked up a 13 starter deck and sleeves. They didn't have any packs or anything. And then around this time is when the Final Fantasy trading card game really hit North America. And it hit North America with the SoCal circuit in August 5th, 2017. Here we're immediately starting to see a little bit of change. Instead of a Lightning deck taking first, Mono Water won first place.
So we had the Final Fantasy IX engine was very popular here. You know, cards like Garnet, Opus 3 starter, Zidane, Steiner, Ico, I think Artemisian was in there. It was very 9 heavy.
Oh, Artemisian was Opus 4.
Was he?
Yeah.
Okay.
But immediately we were already seeing mono water staples. Oh, no, was it? No, Artemisian was Opus 3, my bad. But immediately, like, we're seeing mono water staples that are still present today. So the deck was running Lena, Cagnazzo, Knight, Artemisian, and Vamfrit, cards that we still see largely today. We still see them at 3-ofs. And then the top 8 also included Fire Ice, Mono Water, and Mono Fire. This is actually one of the only times that we see Mono Fire.
Yeah, Mono Fire was valid at this point for a short while.
Yeah, so if that says anything.
Yeah, I think it was during Opus 3 and 4 when I built my Mono Fire deck for the first time, and I liked it. It did okay. I think it was the end of Opus 4 when I finally won a Locals with a Mono Fire, and I kind of gave people some flack for that for the longest time.
Yeah. And then we're shifting from Mono Water topping SoCal to 15 days later in the Western Australia tournament, which was August 20th, in which we saw Earthwind take first place. It was running some kind of interesting stuff. It was more or less a Wind Earth good stuff deck for Opus 3. It was running Deletas, a lot of Zidane H, just a lot of really good cards that were in both colors at the time. It was running the Cadets, the ones that we usually associate with
the
staples.
good ones.
So Trey and 7. It was running Maria, obviously.
Also, I'd like to give a quick shout out to the guy who ran a 37 EX deck, and almost every single one of those EXs were in the summons and backups. Actually, that's where all of them were. There were no forwards with EXs.
A Steiner. There was one Steiner.
There was a Steiner?
Yeah, there was a single Steiner in that.
Single Steiner.
Yeah. But, and then something else kind of fun to note, this was kind of a weird tournament. Especially when the first place deck was running Feral Chaos.
Yeah, it was a very experimental tournament. People really broke the shell of what had been, I don't want to call previously established. Yeah. But, you know, there were some conventional, you know, decks and cards that were being played. And this deck just totally, the whole tournament broke the mold.
Yeah, and then that's when we start going into Opus 4, and we've already gone through Opus 3, immediately seeing less lightning. Once again, it was still a strong color. It's still a very strong color today, once again, at the release of Opus 8. And it was kind of weird that just for Opus 3, we kind of see this quick shift. And eventually, we're going to see it shift back. But moving on to just the release of Opus 4, the first tournament that we were able to find that was larger scale was Winter Cup Wales, December 17th, 2017. Mono Water won first place. The 9 engine is still being played. You know, it's still kind of an Opus 3 deck. Basically, the only real addition that I got was Beatrix and Steiner. And then this is when we started seeing a lot more Mono Water, as there were 4 Mono Water decks in top 8.
Yeah, colors other than Lightning started getting good stuff, which is why we saw this shift in gameplay styles here. The top 4 was Mono Water, which is interesting, and there were scattered multicolor decks with a little bit of Lightning, but, you know, everything from Lightning was starting to run, you know, some of the more basic stuff, a little bit more aggro, sort of burn, sort of not. Yeah. It was a really weird time for Lightning because they were trying to work so much with the older stuff, because the new stuff wasn't working out so hot. The only real new tech that was in there was the Opus 4 Lightning. 5-drop, you can flicker her by discarding another one. And that card gave Lightning some tools, but otherwise it wasn't...
It wasn't too much.
Two of the wind... Oh, and then another thing to note is in that top 8, 2 of the Wind Lightning decks were exactly the same.
Yeah, I think we saw like one slightly different ratio, and that was it.
Yeah, it showed you exactly where, you know, the status quo was for both of those colors, where your only option was to mix them together, and good luck. Funny enough, that's actually the deck I was running for the longest time. I didn't even know it. I just happened to build something very close.
Yeah, and then kind of moving into 2018, for the opening of from 2017 to 2018, we immediately see how powerful Lightning is in the first 3 sets, or the first 4 sets, basically. And we also already see how good Wind and Water is. So those are 2 colors that were pretty dominant for almost all of 2017. with Lightning really kind of starting it off and Water kind of ending it out. And then as we move into 2018, there's the Octagon Open, which was February 16th.
Online tournament, 150 participants.
Yeah.
That might be a little bit skewed of a ratio because I'm sure some people dropped or, had other things interfere.
Yeah.
But, details.
Yeah. But the first place deck was Mono Ice. This is something that I'm very happy about. I'm a huge Mono Ice player. I've been playing it since Opus 4. This was actually the first deck that I looked at that really made me kind of say, like, hey, maybe I should start running Mono Ice. So this was the first instance of the 6 engine that we saw on a major scale. The 6 engine being Locke, Setzer, Celeste, Empire, Sid.
The first top 8 deck to run a Genesis in any form, which is where Genesis started really getting value on online shops on the secondhand market.
Yeah, and then a tech that we saw for a little bit and then tends to rear its head is Terra's. Once again, it's kind of part of the 6 engine. It allows you to search out your summons, but it wasn't. But currently, it's not as important. Back then, having ice summons was really powerful.
Right.
And then this was already running Flans and World of Final Fantasy Sid, which once again is just something that's still kind of seeing play. And this was kind of the beginning of modern Mono Ice as we know it.
Right. Basically, every other deck is mixed with either Ice or Lightning or a Mono Ice deck. And it's the first popular instance of Dottaluma being run as a counter to Ice because people recognizing that, hey, this is a very functional card.
Yeah. And almost as a shout out to like Opus 1, Ice Lightning was once again pretty dominant in that larger tournament when people could kind of put together whatever deck they want.
Yeah.
And then not too later after that, we saw the drop of Opus 5, which, as I'm sure a lot of viewers know, if you have been playing the Final Fantasy game for a while, Opus 5 was a huge set.
It shifted everything that we already knew about the game. We got some of the most powerful cards in the game to this day, and I'm estimating that for a while will be.
Yeah, and almost every color got something. And that was another kind of insane thing with it, because we immediately start seeing the play of these staples, but we're going to get into that in a second. First place was first place Mono Ice. Still running the 6 engine. Very few of the Opus 5 cards, but Thaumaturge notably was run at 3.
Yeah, that was an immediate 3 of in every Ice deck. Any deck that had Ice in it in some fashion.
Yeah, and we're going to be getting into the history of Thaumaturge as well.
Oh, yeah.
At some point. For newer listeners, if you're unaware, the reason we don't see him anymore is because he was actually banned in December of 2018.
Yeah.
But once again, we'll get to that when we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Yeah.
But the rest of the tournament was pretty diverse. There wasn't any repeating decks. There was only 2 Mono Ice in top 8. And this is when we started seeing something that we hasn't seen as much play recently, but running the Emperor, Comlanot, and Star Sybil in Earth decks, kind of as a way to counter Mono Ice, alongside Dottaluma. And then in this tournament, even though Opus 5 was still relatively new, we immediately started seeing the effects of it. And we immediately started seeing staples like Diabolos, Thaumaturge, Orphan, Illua, Cloud of Darkness,
Warrior of Light, Cecil, 5-drop EX, Ishtola.
Yeah.
The list goes on and on. It was just that set shook up so much.
Yeah. And while this deck had made a bit of a splash at Worlds, this was actually the first instance of Mono Water Fusoya. And it wasn't too far, or it was a bit of a far cry from what we have it at now, but it was just kind of cool to see a deck that we kind of associate with Worlds more recently, like almost a year ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then moving on to Masters Kyoto in May 5th, 2018.
So Ice Earth was first place, and that was an interesting combo at that point because nobody had really considered running those 2 colors together before outside of something like a budget standard units deck, at least on a competitive scale. So Dottaluma and Wall saw so much play. They were, large chunks of every tournament's stake. And in Ice, the Final Fantasy VI engine was still being run. I think at this point we can stop mentioning it because that's just kind of it's just the standard for Ice.
Yeah.
Another thing we noticed that was interesting was Sorbet was run with other Mughals for buffs and interesting utility there.
Yeah.
It really kind of threw some people for a loop.
And this tournament, we did see Mono Ice and Lightning Wind, and it's funny because it's not too far off from what we have now. It's the Mono Ice decks are basically the Mono Ice decks that we're running now. They just had Thaumaturge at the time. And then Lightning Wind was a lot of just the same stuff that we still see today.
Yeah.
And then moving on to the next tournament was...
the Emerald Cup of June 9th of 2018.
Yeah.
Mono Ice in first place again.
Yeah.
Surprise!
Woo! Yeah. So this was kind of a bit of the reign of Mono Ice. These last couple tournaments were kind of the progression of Mono Ice and why Mono Ice became such a big threat. So this was the first really discard-heavy variant. It was running Argath, Thaumaturge, the lock within the 6 engine. And then this one was also running Harley and Edward, which this is the first major representation of that small engine. So once again, still run today. And mind you, like, Mono Ice hasn't really changed from 5 to 7. Like, we're still running a lot of the same cards, just with some slightly alterations.
Although one thing to note was one deck, I think it was this tournament or the next, there was one deck that had nearly no summons for a discard ice deck.
Yeah.
So that was very funny to note. They had, I think, maybe 8 or 9 backups, which is generally unheard of outside of Strongest Sword decks.
Oh, Turbo. We're going to be getting to Turbo
More or less, yeah.
And then this is when we actually started seeing people build against Mono Ice. We saw a Mono Earth deck that did well, building exclusively against Ice using Dodaluma, Comlanot, Star Civil Emperor, etc. And then we also started seeing Mono Lightning variants that aren't too far off from where we were seeing them in Opus 7. Same staples, Zemus, Ilwa, Alcid, etc. And then talking about countering Ice, there was Crystal Cup Kansas, which ran... The first place deck was 3D1C, which is a Dodaluma Cactar deck. This got really popular.
Yeah, I net decked it for regionals, I'll admit.
Yeah, and it still is a really powerful color combination, and Dodaluma Cactar is still a very powerful combination just in general. Even though we have gotten printed hate against it in the form of Krail, like, the deck is still very dominant. The deck, or I wouldn't say dominant, but the deck is still very powerful. The deck is still very run. Yeah. And Earth Wind just did well with 3 representations in top 8.
And shout out to the 2 funny fellows who named their decks Marco Polo. That's just a little bit of humor there. I love the creativity in deck names, and I always gotta give them a little bit of a shout out.
Yeah, when we were taking down notes for this episode, we definitely took note of just all the kind of silly names that we were seeing in a lot of the decks.
I wish I was playing Mono Fire. And later on, I think it was like a year later, the same person.
It was only like 2 months ago, or it was 2 months later.
Okay, it was a while later with the same person. I still wish I was playing Mono Fire.
Yeah.
So some humor there, I gotta appreciate it.
Yeah, and then moving on to the Osaka Championships, which was July 1st. Mono Earth got first place. That's when we started seeing Urianger in the deck, which was kind of an interesting choice. But it was more or less the same as the Kansas Cup first place deck. It was basically anti-ice tech. It was anti-ice hate, but the combination of Dodaluma and Cactar can actually kind of keep you going through all the other matchups, not just Mono Ice. And then talking about Mono Ice, it also took the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th slot for the tournament. And once again, Ice hasn't changed too much. So we're not seeing a lot of changes between Opus 5 Ice and Opus 7 Ice. And it's still strong, and it still was strong then to the point where you had to build against it.
And then right after this is when Opus 6 hits. Not much. It didn't create many ripples in the water. Not much of an impact from this set. We got some new cards. One of my favorites, Astinian, but it didn't see a lot of competitive play. It wasn't a huge deal.
People were running... It didn't have the same impact that 5 did, where people were running 3 of these new staples. The only thing that it really did create was Turbo Ice. So moving on to the 2018 North American Nationals, first place was Turbo Ice. So this was the first time seeing Turbo Ice at such a large event. It was running 9 backups. It was so infamous and such an oppressive deck that it ended up basically leading to the ban of both Thaumaturge and Gesper. If it didn't dull something, it broke it. It was a very aggro deck. It was a deck that could win on turn 3, 4, or even 5.
Yeah, because you can't play if you don't have a hand.
I mean, even people in our playgroup were testing it. And they were bringing it to tournaments, and it was doing very, very well.
I think a lot of the times where I almost won, it's like, oh, now you're playing against Turbo. I'm like,
Yeah.
I guess we're just playing as a courtesy.
Yeah, and it always did suck because you had to kind of build against it. You had to put a Shadow Lord in.
Yep.
And that was your best counter, but you needed to run that. And that card isn't always the best, but this is when Shadow Lord started seeing a lot more play, specifically to counter Turbo Ice. Turbo Ice was represented twice in the top 8, and then outside of that, there was just tons of variants on Wind.
Yeah, Wind was important for the reactivation factor. It also had a bit of an aggro factor to it. It gave people an opportunity to kind of delay the inevitable, which, you know, depending on who you're playing against, if their play style, they don't know how to handle it, then that can gain you the win. Yeah.
And then, mind you, this was not too long after the release of Opus 6. We immediately started seeing play of Nidhogg, and through a couple of the decks. The most notable one was Vice Kings.
Yep.
Which has kind of fallen off more recently.
Very much,
but even after it came out, people immediately knew how powerful Nidhogg Renoa was and kind of how the draw engine by using Layla Viking can be, how that can really kind of push a pretty early game Nidhogg.
It just became more oppressive over time because people experimented more, of course, and, you know, the longer a set is out, the more people discover with it, so that kind of goes without saying there.
Yeah. And then we could probably just move on to the next tournament.
Yeah, let's go here.
And then this is when we saw the dawn of Opus 7. So there wasn't a lot that kind of happened in Opus 6. We saw the NA Championships.
That was about it.
Yeah, that was the biggest event. That was probably the most impactful.
They kind of left some time for Opus 6 to stabilize, for the tournament meta to stabilize, and then right before Worlds of 2018, we get Opus 7, and then the tournament happens. And we're going to talk about the top 4 of that tournament. The top, the 5 through 8 were, basically almost the same decks. They weren't...
It was, everybody kind of brought interesting stuff to the table, but a lot of the decks were kind of represented in the top 4.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, a lot of the top 4 kind of resembled itself, but we're going to get into that. So this was Worlds 2018. This was the top 4. And something kind of worth noting is it got announced that Thaumaturge and Gesper were going to be banned, but it wasn't until after Worlds.
Yeah.
Because Thaumaturge and Gesper were banned...
December 1st.
Yeah, December 1st. And this was back in November. So not too long before, but we immediately kind of see an impact of it. So first place was running 3 decks. If you don't know, Worlds has each player bring 3 decks to the table. And first place was Earth Wind, Mono Water Fusoya, and a Mono Ice variant.
So we got a little bit of representation of all the best of the best of the best.
Yeah.
In just the first place winner. And then the other 3 players in top 4
were more or less running the same deck.
Yeah,
which was
very
interesting,
repetitive.
Because we saw different takes on the same decks, but out of the top 4, 3 of them were running Earthwind, and all 4 of them were running a slightly different variation of Mono Ice. Only one was Turbo. The other 3 were kind of more of a control tempo based version.
Right.
There were 5 water variants of decks, 4 Earth and Ice variants, and 6 variations of Wind. Wind was by far the most represented color in this top 4.
Half. Yeah. Over half.
Yeah. And Lightning and Fire saw 0 decks. They saw 0 play, and only 3 fire cards total were among all 12 or all 12
one
of the
player
decks.
One player ran 3 copies of 7-drop Phoenix. That was it.
Yeah.
It was really funny to look at.
Yeah. And this is when we really started seeing the rise of Mono Wind. And Wind has always been a strong color, and you could see that very much so at Opus 5 when Earth Wind really started rising as a counter to Mono Ice, and then kind of slid into the place where Mono Ice once was, where it was this very dominant deck.
People were discovering the 4 or 5 backups in one turn combo. It wasn't very consistent, but it was a potential, and people were very much willing to experiment with anything in Wind that could give them an advantage over other colors, because as good as Wind was, it never really took off on its own yet.
Yeah, until
this.
Until right before 2019.
Yeah.
And then after this tournament is when Thaumaturge and Gesper were banned. A lot of people had to kind of, in general, change their Mono Ice decks, start messing around with it. And we see an immediate kind of shift in 2019 where at Reunion, for the cards of Ivalice,
Ivalice,
January 12th, 2019. First place deck was Scions. So Scions has been around since Opus 5, but we didn't see a lot of representation. It had some spots every year.
Yeah, it had a lot of regional dominance.
Yes.
It had a lot of local dominance, but nobody had been really... I don't want to... I want to say nobody was really ballsy enough to bring it to a larger scale tournament. But here we see it did something.
Yeah, and it is a strong deck. But just because it didn't have that much representation, we still haven't seen it on the list until now. The deck was immediately running Opus 7 Noctis. So Noctis, who's once again kind of considered a modern staple, saw play pretty soon after Opus 7 came out.
Especially with those box toppers. Everybody got the buy-a-box promos and went wild.
Yeah. And even now, we're still seeing a lot of Wind being played. It's still a very dominant color. This still took over, if I remember correctly, about 40% of the tournament.
Yep, that sounds about right.
Despite the fact that the top deck was Lighting Earth.
Yeah.
And then kind of moving on to...
the Grand Open of Bologna on the 20th of January the same year.
Yeah.
Water Wind was dominant. It, showed some interesting potential, and nobody had really combined those two colors for a good 3-4 sets, I want to say.
Well, Water Wind was very represented in Worlds, because we saw Unariku Pain combos.
Oh, you're right, you're right. Yep.
So this, once again, kind of shows the dominance of Wind. It shows how powerful Wind was, with all top 4 decks having Wind in them in some form. Dataluma and Cactar is still being played. It's still very powerful. Once again, still seeing played today. And then it's time for us to move on to a tournament that our play group was very excited about, which was the Epic Petit Cup.
Yep.
January.
Everybody watched
26th.
that one with some excitement.
And the big part of it, and this is something that a lot of even newer viewers would probably know about, is Icewind Chocobos. So, which was a deck that went 12-0 the entire tournament.
That's news.
Yeah.
That's something big.
Yeah. And this was also the first deck where we saw 4-drop backup Snow from Opus 7 being played. He works very, very well with Chocobos. He's still a very aggro card, even though he's not seeing a lot of play currently. And once again, Wind was very, very dominant. Over half the total cards ran. Y'shtola, or a fun little thing that we learned from FF Decks, is that Y'shtola was run in 87% of decks. Opus 5 Y'shtola.
Yep. The negate Y'shtola, cancel an auto ability or summon, for those of you who don't know.
Yeah, and it doesn't receive damage.
Yeah.
And it's just this really good staple. It's a good example of how much Opus 5 has still impacted the game, and how a lot of Opus 5 cards are still being ran in large quantities.
Yeah.
And this is also...
any deck that was running Wind was running Yuri and Chelinka.
Yeah.
That combo is also very oppressive.
Yeah, and this was the second time that we saw it after Worlds.
Right.
And Yuri Chelinka, once again, is still being played. And then moving on to the next tournament, was the Dragoon City Championship, February 17th, 2019.
Mono Lightning came back.
Yep.
Was so happy to see Lightning again.
Yeah, this was the first kind of diverse tournament that we saw in a while. It didn't have as much Wind as the previous ones. It was pretty split. Mono Lightning took first place. Once again, less Wind play. And this is actually the first tournament since Opus 4 to actually have a mono fire deck.
Again, so happy.
Yeah.
It took a while, but we got there.
Yeah. Sadly, if I remember correctly, this is the last time that we see it for a little bit.
Pretty much.
Very recently.
Very recently.
Yeah, because we're not going to be talking about it on the show, but recently a tournament, or a mono fire deck did really well in the tournament using Duncan. But once again, kind of moving back to February, there was the RVA Petit Cup, which was February 23rd. And then this one actually had a tied first place between Water, Earth, and Mono Wind.
Yep, top 2 players agreed to a split, so no contest there.
Yeah, and through the tournament, there was a lot of just kind of Earth variants. Once again, this was kind of a lot of stuff that we've already seen, so it wasn't... There's not a lot to go over.
Right.
It's just a lot of things that we...
Yeah, kind of a return to older tournament roots for a little while there.
Kind of a return to form, yeah.
Yeah.
And then... Moving on to Crystal Cup, Germany, or the Ice Cup.
Yep. Once again, we have Water Wind. Standard unit Chocobos. It was a good combo deck here, or rather a combination in the deck, not a combo deck. Yeah. There is a distinction.
Yeah.
Standard units came back after a while, and that was good because it had been quite a few sets since we'd seen a very strong Standard units deck. Opus It was quite a few different sets. Actually, all the different sets,
Yeah.
5, 6, and 7, had some good standard unit support.
Yeah.
Seemed like Squeenix really wanted that to happen there.
Yeah.
And it did.
Yeah, and this was the culmination of that, where Water Wind, which is probably the two best colors that you can run for standard units, was able to kind of take this first place. Once again, we saw a lot of wind. But Ice was slowly starting to make a comeback. And then this is also when we saw Agrius Decks, which currently, at least in our play group, is being experimented with. People are kind of trying to find a good list for it. And these were two very good lists, and the first time that we really see Agrius in competitive play.
One of which... all of their forwards weren't valid for Agrius. Yeah. Well, there was one deck where all of their backups were valid for Agrius.
Yeah, tons of 3-drop backups. Yeah.
That was very interesting to see. I think they did pretty well. They didn't do amazing, but they kicked some butt.
I wish that we had it in front of us, but you could edit. So
yeah, I'll put a screenshot.
Yeah, you'll put up the proof to prove us wrong, but because I'm pretty sure it got 5th place. I remember there was a variant that was either 7th or 8th place, and another one that was 5th place. If I remember correctly, the 5th place one was the one that had all the weird 3-drop backups.
Right, but that's still out of what there was over. There were more than 8 participants. It was out of a bunch of other people.
Yeah. So to see 2 of the deck in the top 8 was
it was very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, it was relevant. It's not like it's a fluke.
Yeah.
So I guess we can move on to the Kansas City Petite.
Yeah.
That's in March 9th of 2019, so that was only a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Earth Wind once again came back. We took first place. Wind was showing that it was very strong in the U.S. and it's got a handful of improvements over, of course, of a bunch of tournaments. So it's kind of people are still trying to run it, and by God, it's still working.
And it's still working. It's still going to work for a long while. I really doubt that we're going to see a ban, and nor do I think that we need one for mono wind.
Right, I agree.
But wind right now, and probably for a little while, will still be very strong. And then the final deck the final tournament that we're covering is the Petit Cup finals, which were just
was that like a week ago or a week and a half ago? Yeah, it wasn't too long ago.
So Mono Lightning took first place, and this is when we started seeing. I took note of this because we've been seing it a lot in our play group.
Blew up.
Is Sid Previa, Louis Sui, and Alphano. And I looked through all the Mono Lightning lists. This is kind of the first real instance of it, at least on a larger scale.
Right.
But Sid Previa is a very interesting card, and it is a rather powerful card. And being able to hit the Sid Previa, Louis Soi, and Alphano all in one turn is very Mono Wind-esque, in which you're hitting just 3 backups in one turn.
But it gives Lightning a very distinct advantage because a lot of the cards in Lightning like to cycle those backups. They like to have 5 backups out on the field early. So the sooner you can get that, the better. And, this tournament really showed the potential of this combo, and it immediately became widespread across, I don't want to say the world, but definitely in America, people have already started going crazy about that combo.
Yeah. At least in our playgroup. In Chicago, at least people are going crazy.
And it's funny because Sid Previa is such a, by monetary value, a cheap card.
Yeah.
So it's easy to get your hands on.
About him,
Yeah, so surprising.
Yeah, and then the only other note about the Petit Cup finals was that Earth was the most played colored. Wind and Lightning weren't too far behind, but Earth by itself is still very strong, and it did get a lot of good tools over the last 3 sets between 5, 6, and 7.
Definitely.
And that actually catches us up on
that day. We're up to date as of now.
If I remember correctly, just yesterday there were results for another tournament, but we're gonna go into that when Opus 8 finishes up.
Yeah, we'll wait a little while, do a little review at the end of every set, and see where the meta was, going into that set, and where the meta is on the way out of that set. So it gives us something to bring to you guys, a little bit of analysis, and it brings a discussion point between each of us, so you guys can tell us what you think is important for the meta, and how you've seen it develop in your local area or your entire region, etc.
Yeah, because these tournaments were and always will be just kind of snapshots. They're just going to be this quick flash fire kind of flash in the pan. Hey, this is the deck that was good. These were the decks that were good. And then it changes just so frequently. So as we've been kind of saying throughout this podcast,
right.
This deck was really good, and then this deck took over, and then this deck took over. Nothing really died.
Yeah,
There's
nothing
a lot
died.
of, and we still see a lot of variations of decks that were still being run, and even in Opus 3. We're still seeing Mono Water being run. We're still seeing Mono Wind being run. Even Unariku Pain has still gone through several iterations, and it's still very powerful.
Just buy
today.
that 10 starter deck, and you're already halfway there.
Yeah, and then Mono Lightning and just Lightning's kind of early dominance and how Lightning is still a very strong color today. It's interesting, especially when you do compare us to Pokemon or Magic the Gathering, in which you do see similar archetypes, but you rarely see the same kind of deck carry on.
Yeah, and then there's Yu-Gi-Oh, which that's we could talk for we could do a whole video on just discussing the differences there.
Yeah, we just might, but. But we'll see. Yeah, so this was our first little meta snapshot. We just kind of wanted to talk about the history of the meta. This is something that hasn't really... This is some content that hasn't really been explored for Final Fantasy yet.
People explore the tournaments as they happen. People give analysis on each individual tournament, but nobody has really... Not that we've been able to find... nobody's really gathered it all into one place and kind of sorted it individually, comparing, local meta to larger regional meta to the global meta as it developed, which of course the global meta we only see once a year basically.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to look at that and say, how is this developed? You have to look at the individual regions of the world and see what's coming of what.
Yeah. But as we're going into Opus 8, we still have a lot to go. Opus 9 is eventually on the horizon. Has been announced.
We have the box art, I think.
Yeah, we have the box art, which is Vincent. And hopefully they haven't changed it by then. But, so this game, we're 8 sets in now. The game still feels fresh. The game still feels new, especially compared to Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon. The game is a baby. It's still very, very new, and I'm really excited to kind of see where it goes from here. And I think we do have a bright future ahead of us.
Yeah, we've gotten a breath of fresh life with Opus 8. It's a great set. Everyone's talking about, it's a great shake-up set. It's the new Opus 5. It's a game changer. It's this, it's that. And everyone's experimenting like crazy. Yeah. I've myself already edited, I think, 5 decks, and I'm working on another 2 new ones.
Yeah, like literally every single one of my decks I had to swap out at least 2 or 3 times. So kind of moving off the topic of the meta, this was this is our first podcast episode. This is us trying to throw our hat into the ring. Please feel free to comment. Tell us how bad we did, how good we did. We're just looking for feedback right now, and hopefully we can kind of turn this into a weekly thing. Yep. And we've got plenty of ideas. We want to have plenty of guests. And feel free to just reach out to us and just kind of give us some constructive criticism.
Yeah. If you feel like supporting us, I'm not going to do the whole YouTuber plug stuff, but if you feel like giving us some direct support,
we do have a coffee.
We do have a coffee. Yeah. Buy us a booster pack. We'll, maybe after a while we'll grab all the packs bought from that, and we can just do an opening. Grab maybe 5-10 packs from each set, something like that. We'll figure something out.
Yeah, we can do something silly, and then it's also obviously going to go towards better equipment.
Right.
Not to linger too much on it, because I'm sure they don't want to listen to a bunch of advertisements.
Hey, it's Ty.
And Eric.
From ShantottoCast. Thanks for watching or listening in. We're going to be uploading every weekend.
We hope you enjoyed this episode, and you're looking forward to more.